They found it about as far away as it's possible to get. The Highlands of Scotland. Their passion for everything Scottish was part of the reinvention of the Highlands as wild and romantic. All started by the novels of Sir Walter Scott earlier in the century. Kilts, clans, chieftains, wild scenery. All this was once dismissed by the English as primitive. Now it was exotic and exciting. Their first trip together started a lifelong love affair with the Highlands. For Albert, Scotland's forests and glens were a welcome reminder of his native Germany. What he and Victoria wanted here too was a refuge, a place of their own. The castle they designed was half Highland romance, half German fairy tale. Some people called it pepper pot and gingerbread. Albert and Victoria called it beautiful. They hurled themselves into the Highland lifestyle. Everyone had to wear Highland dress. Porridge and kippers were served for breakfast. And according to one maid of honour, the pipers played loud enough to blow your head off. Inside, the style was robustly, even overwhelmingly Scottish. From curtains to carpets to wallpaper, it was disparagingly dubbed tartanitis. One of their grandchildren recalled, "It had a way of flickering before your eyes and confusing your brain." One artist in particular was their favourite to depict life at Balmoral.
I've always loved the Carl Haag watercolours. A real genius, I think. And he stayed a lot at Balmoral and did all these, I think, wonderful watercolours of the children and scenes of the family going up Loch na Gar, you know, the mountain for picnics or whatever it was.
A very royal kind of picnic, as Victoria, the children and attendants follow on behind, an intrepid Albert leads the way to the top of the mountain. The painting was his present to Victoria. In Victoria's present to Albert, she's come out from the castle to admire the day's hunt. Albert proudly shows off a dead stag. Actually, Albert was a terrible shot, so a bit of poetic license there.
For them, Scotland wasn't only an escape into a kind of simulated Duchy of Coburg dropped in the middle of Scotland. It was an escape. It was an escape to an earlier period. In the south, everything was the world of commerce and the city and business and manufacture. And up in Scotland, there were feudal lords and castles, and everybody bowed and scraped. It was a world which had completely gone in the south. There they were, up with clansmen and tartans and chiefs of the clan and quite a primitive society, and that I think appealed to her.
The Royal Workshops in London are where the art and objects of the royal collection are conserved and restored. A pair of candelabra from Balmoral are being spruced up for the coming exhibition.
These are good examples of things that Queen Victoria and Prince Albert had made for their own house. They're great English craftsmanship of the mid-19th century, Minton of Stoke here and Winfield of Birmingham, and in this very striking Highland style, clearly designed for Balmoral. And the figures were designed by Edwin Landseer, the painter, who was often a guest staying at Balmoral.
And how would you describe the style of these?
They're really in the sort of Scottish baronial
Scottish style.
Very grand, certainly, aren't
very
they?
grand, with all motives: stags' heads, the shooting bags, the rifles, the dirks, daggers, hunting horns here, and of course the full Highland dress, and no doubt hunting and hunting dogs depicted as well.
I think it's a great sense of fun, actually, to be able to say, well, we built a Highland castle, let's make everything, give everything a Highland theme.
Now, in this rather handy picture you've got here, this was painted, when would this be painted?
This was painted in 1857.
And it works as a brilliant reference guide, doesn't it? Because these are here, and you can see exactly what they used to look like.
Absolutely. Here you can see the candelabra in the Queen's drawing room, showing their original decoration of gold and patinated silver.
Right.
And you can see that the hunting horns here were black as well as the stag's heads.
And what made them black?
That was a form of patination. It was artificially oxidizing the surface of the silver to give it this rather blue-black finish.
Now, I noticed that as well as the wear and tear here, there's a break round the neck here, so they've had a few knocks, haven't they, these things?
When they're done, you won't see any of them.
Really?
Absolutely, I
There's
promise.
a telltale bit of glue here that I can see. The artist who designed the candelabra is better known as the man who sculpted the lions in Trafalgar Square. And animals were what Edwin Landseer did best. And Victoria and Albert loved the heroic, often sentimental way he portrayed them. A stag surveys his kingdom. A sheepdog mourns his dead master. And Albert's favourite greyhound. Victoria commissioned this painting for Albert's birthday, just a year after they were married. It's a portrait of Albert without the prince, a collection of the things dearest to his heart. His dog Eos guards her master's possessions. His ivory-topped cane, his top hat, leather gloves, and a stool covered in deerskin, a reference to Albert the huntsman. And Landseer borrowed these things without asking, so there was a bit of a flutter in the royal household when Albert wanted to go out, and his top hat and gloves couldn't be found. Here's Eos again, another birthday present, and their daughter Vicky, aged 2. Landseer's pictures portrayed Victoria and Albert as the very model of a royal couple. At home with the locals, joining in their pursuits. Fond of children. fond of animals, alive or dead.
I mean, it was a very sentimental age. I suppose there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it depends on the way people are looking at the world at the time. And you could say it was trite or self-righteous or moralizing or something, but I don't think one should necessarily condemn because of that. But it is interesting how sometimes things go through these fashions, don't they? So people remove a lot of things, oh, well, it's boring and awful or overblown or whatever, only to find 25, 50 years later it's coming back again.
Windsor Castle has been the home of English kings and queens since medieval times. The castle houses more of the royal art collection than any other royal residence.
Growing up in those houses like Windsor, you know, you rush up and down corridors, I don't know, mucking about as small children, never really noticing the surroundings much. And I've never forgotten, suddenly, I think it must have been about the age of 14, I suddenly started to notice the paintings. I can't tell you how wonderful it was, that moment.
Most of the art here is formal and official, staged to make a courtly impression. But for Victoria and Albert, art was also something more homely, a kind of diary in pictures.
Both of them were obsessed with recording everything. Little watercolours of the Christmas decorations, the rooms they went to, every single event. It was absolutely every aspect of their life. I mean, there's absolutely no precedent I know before Victoria and Albert of a sovereign or a royal couple actually setting out to record every significant moment in their lives.
This is one of the albums which have survived from Victoria and Albert's collection. In this case, actually, the theatrical album.
Can we have a look? Let's have a look
Yes.
inside. So it's a bit like, you know, these days people look through their photo albums.
Yes, exactly. This is by Edward Corbould. It is a depiction of a performance of King John in London in 1852.
And so this is what, full of images from plays that they'd been to together?
Yes, indeed.
So what else have we got? Let's have a look. This is fascinating.
So here we have
Una Noche in Sevilla. The Spanish dancers at the Haymarket Theatre, 1855. Look at that.
Occasionally, we know they actually travelled around with these albums, and we know from Queen Victoria's journal that they would spend quiet evenings together, turning through the pages and reminiscing.
Oh, about things they'd seen, places they'd been. What about these, then, these scenes here? This looks like Buckingham Palace, isn't it?
Yes, this is the garden front of Buckingham Palace in 1839, and it was #1 in Souvenir Album, #1. So this was the first one to be included in the
it's a good
Souvenir
place to
Album.
start, isn't it?
Good place to
With
start.
your home.
Then here, to me, a very, very touching one, and it's the heart of what these Souvenir Albums were all about. This is the schoolroom where Albert and his elder brother had their lessons, the table on which they were dressed by their nurse, the piano that they used to play, and Victoria in her journal in 1845 describes the holes in the walls, which were the result of their fencing lessons, which took place in the same room.
Fantastic. And what have we got under here?
This is Manchester.
Wow, industrial Manchester.
Yes. Shortly after their visit to Manchester in the late 1850s. I mean, you can feel the pollution in the sky, these huge chimneys, and then the spires of the churches in the background, but seen rather idyllically from the rural foreground.
Victoria and Albert's art reflected their life and their love. But it wasn't an entirely equal partnership. Albert loved Victoria, certainly, but Victoria adored Albert. And like any couple, there were tensions. Albert avoided his wife if she was in a temper, preferring to have it out with her in writing. You have again lost your self-control quite unnecessarily. I did not begin the conversation, but you have followed me about and continued it from room to room. I do my duty towards you, even though it means life is embittered by scenes, in inverted commas. Their ever-growing family placed an additional strain on their relationship, giving birth to 9 children in 15 years. An exhausted Victoria found herself having to allow Albert to take the lead.
It's mainly her pregnancies that slow her down. She realizes this relationship can only survive if one of them gives in, and she's the one who gives in. In many ways, he breaks her will. And you can see that in the letters he writes to her when they are courting. He writes, "Beloved Victoria," and a few years later he writes, when they have been married for a while, "My dear child."
Albert valued self-control and liked to be in control of others, something that did not endear him to many around him. Albert had few friends at court or anywhere else. He could be ungracious in society, arrogant, humourless, and he didn't flirt. Albert, said the Queen, is seldom much pleased with ladies or princesses.
Albert was very driven. I mean, he was a Victorian before you invented the word Victorian. He was into self-betterment. He was into religion. He wanted to do something with his life. He wanted to help. He wanted to work for a greater good. That's why he took on Victoria. I mean, she was a project in many ways to him. And he believed in educating himself all his life. I mean, he had so many interests. He was in that way a Renaissance prince.
The pinnacle of Albert's achievements came 10 years into their marriage. To celebrate the progress of Victorian Britain, a great exhibition was to be held in London's Hyde Park. It would be, said Albert, a living picture of the point of development at which the whole of mankind has arrived. Albert was in his element, tirelessly pushing through his plans for one of the greatest events Britain would ever see. A colossal building of steel and glass was constructed to house it. It would become known as the Crystal Palace. There were halls dedicated to art, science, and industry. As always, Albert and Victoria commissioned dozens of paintings to record Albert's vision of universal harmony. Victoria believed that at last people would see the brilliant and creative Albert that she adored. "This is the greatest day in our history," she said. "Albert's name is immortalized."
Six million people went to see that exhibition in 1851. 6 million people, they get there for a start. Presumably the railways were beginning to become more effective, but even so, it was truly remarkable and obviously had a major impact generally, so that people could see what was happening and what was available and where things were going and so on. But I think it was an incredibly bold venture.
Also on show were some of Victoria and Albert's own possessions, such as this extraordinary ivory throne. It's now being restored in the royal workshops.
It's a throne that was presented to Queen Victoria by someone called the Raja of Travancore, and it was really the centrepiece of the Indian court of the Great Exhibition.
And what did she do with it?
She used it.
She actually sat on it?
Yeah, she used it at Windsor in the audience room. We've got a number of images of her sitting in it. In 1855, so a bit after the Great Exhibition, she received the ambassadors of Siam, who had to crawl towards the throne on the carpet. She was sitting in this.
What, crawl on all fours?
Yes, that's out of tribute to the Queen. And she lost it. She went into uncontrolled fits of laughter.
Oh, poor chaps.
These must have been shaking.
And this is ivory, isn't it?
Yes, solid ivory. Ivory veneer, ivory plaques, and carved solid ivory.
There's these missing bits here.
Well, no, it's not missing. We've removed it so it can be cleaned and then reapplied.
Okay.
In a clean
And when
condition.
it comes to finding new ivory, which obviously is banned, you can't trade in ivory these days.
No, we
What
don't
do you
use
do?
we don't use new ivory. We use antique ivory, ivory from trophies and presents.
So you were just
It's
plundering other ivory?
Yes, we've had a lot of ivory in store from the hunting days of the Raj and of the royals.
Yeah.
Here's a very old part of a tusk. This was the piece that was in the cheek of the elephant, and this is the other end. You can see the vessel that runs through the centre. And it's very, very heavy.
To clean it, obviously, that's how it goes. Whoa! That's extraordinary.
Had two of those, and that's only half of it.
That is... I had no idea it was so heavy. So you'd get this, and then once you've cleaned it, actually I can see inside, because there's a...
It's
kind of
very
crack
yellow
here.
because there's no sunlight.
And then once you get below this yellow pattern, it's pure
It's
white again.
not pure white, it's ivory white.
Ivory, yeah, of course, yeah.
But it will bleach in time due to UV light.
And there's a little gap here. Is there's something missing here?
Yes, well, the whole centrepiece has been missing. We've made a mock-up of it to see how it looks.
Wow. So this...
This is actually ivory with a rope design around the centre and the jewel inset.
And then it just slots beautifully into
Yes,
here.
you can place it in.
Perfect.
When it's put together, it has green silk velvet cushions, and it looks altogether much sort of finer in its finished state, we hope.
As Albert approached his 40s, he seemed to be growing increasingly unhappy. The Great Exhibition had been his towering achievement, but it was soon forgotten. He was addicted to work, but neither the public nor the court had taken this foreign intellectual to their hearts.
They thought he was too clever. I don't know, maybe he didn't always take part in all the things that they expected him to take part in, I don't know. But it is, I can see it's quite difficult to come from another country and live in somebody else's. Perhaps they thought he was, yes, too clever by half, perhaps.
Basically, I mean, those last few years, he was practically dead with exhaustion with everything he took on. All the state papers, all the minutes, every time he interviewed somebody, made notes, everything was landed onto him. It was impossible.
Albert felt increasingly isolated. He had few British friends, and Victoria couldn't give him the intellectual companionship he needed. In a letter he sent home to Germany, he described his life as being like a donkey going round and round in circles to bring up water from a well. Victoria began to worry. "My greatest of all anxieties," she said, "is that dearest Albert wears himself out by all he does." She was right to be concerned. In the winter of 1861, Albert complained of feeling ill. At Windsor Castle, he fell into a fever.
he realizes that he has something worse than a cold. And he knew that he couldn't talk with his wife about it because she was writing letters to her children saying, "Oh, Papa is moaning again, and I don't understand what's wrong with him." She loved him very much, but because she herself was such a robust person, she couldn't understand that her husband was totally burned out at such a young age.
On the 9th of December, the doctors diagnosed typhoid. Five days later, Albert died. He was 42. The Queen was devastated. Why hadn't he put up more of a struggle? She appeared to feel strangely let down by him. He seemed to care not to live, she said. He died for want of what they call pluck.
But he died so young, it obviously did completely and utterly destroy her life.
Albert never saw Victoria's last gift to him. The mausoleum in the grounds of Windsor Castle is in his favourite Italian Renaissance style. The effigy of Victoria was carved at the same time as Albert's, but it would be another 40 years before it was laid by his side. Victoria and Albert's love for each other had inspired their love of art. When Albert died, Victoria's passion for art died with him. Royal marriages don't always touch the life of a nation. This one did. Albert and Victoria's 21 years together created a wealth of art that spoke of their love for each other, their need to create a happy family home, and their desire to chronicle it all for themselves and for posterity.